Hello and welcome to today's episode. Um, Today I'm going to review Trump foreign policy a little bit. Um, of course, so we'll have to start with the tariffs. Trump disrupted, President Trump disrupted globalization by introducing baseline 10% tariffs on all goods from all economies. On India, first I'll talk about India. Trump imposed 26% tariffs on India. Some sectors like agriculture, auto, pharma were hit, but I think manufacturing was kept out. So it was bittersweet, but fair. But India does have tariffs on American agriculture and auto sector, so that's fine. On Israel, Israel just days before Trump's tariff announcement removed tariffs on American goods. This surprised many Americans who didn't know Israel had tariffs on American imports. Nonetheless, Trump government has hit Israel with 17% tariffs. I don't think these tariffs will last very long, but as they are, Israelis were hit with 17% tariffs. On Southeast and East Asia, Southeast Asian countries used as a dumping ground by China to bypass tariffs during Trump's first administration. They were used by China. Final goods would have made in Vietnam, for example, but most of it would be made in China and the final assembly and packaging would happen in Vietnam. Vietnam was hit with 46% tariffs, Cambodia 49, Laos 48, Thailand 36, Malaysia 24, Indonesia 32, Philippines 17, Japan 24, South Korea 25, Taiwan 32%. Are excluded from tariffs on Taiwan. US is encouraging TSMC, the Taiwanese company that produces more than 60% of global semiconductors, to produce chips in US. There are news stories about a joint venture between Taiwan's TSMC and US Intel to produce chips in United States, but we'll have to see how they work out. On Europe, US slapped 20% tariffs on EU. EU promised retaliation but also seeks negotiations. On China, US has slapped 34% tariffs on China on top of existing 20%, meaning more than 50% tariffs on China. China has put retaliatory tariffs and also put additional sanctions on rare earth minerals on top of existing sanctions on American rare earth minerals or supply to American companies of rare earth minerals. Trump then increased it to 84%, 125%, and finally 145%. China retaliated by putting 84% first and then to 125%. Trump wanted the Chinese to call him, and he also signaled that he wants to do a trade deal with China. Chinese did not respond. Then President Trump announced 90-day pause on tariffs on all countries except China. This happened because of treasury bonds in US. I don't fully understand these things, but consensus is if the movement in bond markets had continued, US dollar would have collapsed. Trump talked about China blinking first when Chinese imposed retaliatory tariffs. But it seems it was Donald Trump who blinked first. Trump announced exemption on phones, laptops, chips, and other electronics from his sweeping 145% China tariffs. China, however, have kept 125% tariffs. There was some news coming out of China that many factories were hit. Many young people who just set up factories and started producing stuff to export to America, or many people who have received orders from foreign companies to produce stuff and they have produced that stuff, but the foreign companies are not taking their orders because of the tariffs, or they have paused orders and the Chinese factories have ordered like raw materials to for these orders from foreign companies, but then foreign companies uh, cancel those orders and the Chinese factories are stuck with the bill for the raw materials or for the factory setup, land acquisition, setting up factory, and all that. So these tariffs did have an impact on Chinese factories, but also many oligarchs, let's just call them American oligarchs, did not like tariffs and put pressure put pressure on Donald Trump to pause those tariffs or to cancel those tariffs. Um, Trump announced 90-day pause. I think Elon Musk was particularly upset. But President Trump, when he was running, said that he would impose tariffs, especially on China. And many of these oligarchs backed him at that point. But suddenly they panicked. Like, what did they expect? Did they expect this was just campaign promise and he would not follow through? And also, I think it was either China or Japan who started dumping treasuries, US treasuries, and this had an impact on the bond markets. There is the stock market and there's the bond market. And I cannot be I cannot be specific, but all I can say is, because I don't know the details, but there is a difference between stock market and a bond market, and the bond market is like the real deep state, and bond markets dictate everything, and these are the narratives that I am hearing. And the bond markets were not supposed to go the way they went, and he did not expect the President Trump and his administration did not expect that, and that is the reason why he announced a 90-day pause on tariffs. So it was either China or Japan, which both of those countries hold a lot of US treasuries. They started dumping them, and that caused the reaction panic in the bond markets. And that's what basically happened. I think it was probably China, because I also heard and saw some reports about Chinese government trying to prop up yuan, the Chinese currency. So maybe it was China, but maybe it was Japan. Many people speculate it was Japan, because even Japan has had a currency problem. There were many like reports coming out of Bank of Japan under Biden administration that Bank of Japan is trying to prop up the currency, and the Japanese currency, Japanese yen, I think it's called, did suffer a did suffer collapse. It did collapse. I think $1 meant 146 Japanese yen. This was under Biden administration. So maybe it was Japan, maybe it was China. It was most likely China. But Chinese did not respond. They only retaliated with tariffs. They did not come to Trump running for a trade deal. They did not call him like Trump wanted them to, and Trump has rolled back those tariffs.
Update: President Trump has increased tariffs on China to 245%. Let's see what happens.
US Russia negotiation updates. US Russia began talks on Ukraine and bilateral relations in Saudi Arabia without including Ukraine and EU countries. This predictably angered Europeans. Trump and Zelensky had a public blow up. Trump had also said he was very angry and pissed off after Putin criticized the credibility of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's leadership. So if you don't know, Zelensky cancelled elections. I think it was last year, or maybe this year, second half of last year or early this year, or maybe it was first half. But Zelensky cancelled elections and imposed martial law. Makes sense. But the term of the martial law has expired and he's still in power. He has not imposed another martial law. I think he did extend them once. He did extend martial law once, but he was supposed to hold elections according to Ukrainian constitution. But he didn't. And from legal standpoint, he is an illegitimate leader of Ukraine. Just from a Ukrainian legal standpoint. But we know what the state of Ukraine is. It's American vassal state. So what Americans say, Ukraine and the Ukraine will do. It seems the current leadership, the deep state, air quotes, American, is comfortable with Ukrainian leader Zelensky, and so that's why he's holding power right now. Last month, Putin rejected a joint US-Ukrainian proposal for a complete and unconditional ceasefire because the Russians wanted a permanent solution, and a ceasefire will only allow NATO to rearm Ukraine and for Ukraine to reorganize itself, to update their strategies and come up with new strategies, and Putin did not want that. Russian Foreign Ministry and US State Department have held talks in Istanbul on 10th of April. Talks lasted for several hours. Steve Witkoff, US President Trump's special envoy, met Putin for the second time on April 11th. They greeted each other in St. Petersburg Presidential Library. Talks said to have lasted for 4 hours. So the negotiations are going on. Trump recently commented that this was Biden's war. But the thing is, he has inherited the war by listening to neoconservative establishment in Washington DC and the European elites in Brussels instead of doing what he promised to do before elections. So he wanted to end the war in 24 hours with a phone call. That's what he promised. He would stop sending money to Ukraine, which would force Ukraine to negotiate. And Trump was inaugurated in January. We are in April now. So he has, in a way, inherited that war. He cannot blame Biden now, unfortunately for him. He cannot blame. This is on him right now. Because he listened to the people in Washington DC, maybe to the military contractors who were supposed to receive money or receive orders for new equipment as they sent the old equipment to Ukraine. Maybe he was trying to fulfill the orders that were previously maybe he was trying to fulfill the orders for equipment that was ordered by the Biden administration to the military industrial complex. Whatever the reason is, he has inherited that war. He cannot blame Biden now. President Trump is also stuck in a multi-front war. A proxy war with Russia, a cold war with Iran that is increasingly becoming hot and may escalate into a full war, and a trade war with China. A multi-front war is always bad for the party fighting on multiple fronts, and the risk of losing all wars or all fronts is high. He should focus on one. The easiest one to solve is the proxy war with Russia. He just has to do what he talked about during election process. Stop arming Ukraine, do a deal with Russia, and reduce American military presence in Europe, if not just leaving NATO entirely. Once he does that, he can focus on Iran. Russians have an official strategic partnership with Iran, which both countries signed in January of this year. So the Russians can help Americans deal with Iran by acting as a mediator. Then he can focus on China. Even with China, the American strategic vulnerability is the rare earths, the minerals that are needed for manufacturing. And guess what? When the negotiations between Americans and Russians began, President Putin offered America rare earths. That's what he promised. Rare earths from the four oblasts that Russians annexed. So Russia can help them in Europe, Russia can help them with Iran, and Russia can help them with China. Chinese have a near monopoly on rare earth minerals. Russians can help them. Russians can help Americans to deal with that monopoly by offering rare earths from Russia and other countries that Russians have license or contracts for. So the issue or the or the solutions for all the American issues lie in Russia and they lie with Putin. For European problem, Iranian problem, Chinese problem. Under Biden administration, there was like this initiative of not official but unofficial of China plus one model. American supply chains would diversify away from China into other countries. Of course, the main country was India, but there was also Vietnam and Mexico. So, China plus India, or China plus Vietnam, or China plus Mexico. When it comes to rare earths, the China plus one country, the plus one is Russia. At least for now. Of course, President Trump can annex Greenland and maybe go for the Arctic. But right now, the solution, the plus one, is Russia. So he must hurry and negotiate with Russia. US preparing for a war with Iran. US has deployed B-2 or B-52 bombers in Diego Garcia, its famous military base in Chagos Islands in Indian Ocean. It recently bombed Ansar Allah in Yemen, or Houthis as they are known. Trump posted a video of people who were standing in circle for a religious ceremony getting bombed. Of course, he was heavily criticized by his voters who did not want any wars in the Middle East, but also no wars in Ukraine as well, on European continent. His supporters do not like wars at all. So, of course, everyone was hating him and criticizing him for this bombing. Also, plans surrounding this bombing were leaked, air quotes leaked, after a Trump administration member added a journalist from the publication The Atlantic onto a Signal group chat, and he just published them. It wasn't a leak official, but if you add someone who doesn't belong there and that person snitches, that's a leak. And that person who does not belong in that group was a journalist. So, kind of a self goal. This bombing apparently cost US $1 billion and most of the casualties were civilians. So, the purpose of this bombing was to send a message to Houthis and Iranians. Total disaster, total waste of lives, and also waste of money. Why were he doing that? There was no reason for do that. There was no reason for America to do this. In the early 2000s, US 4-star general and the Supreme Allied Commander Europe of NATO, from 1997 to 2000. General Wesley Clark revealed on an interview the plans he saw to take out 7 countries in 5 years. He saw them before US invaded Iraq on the fake pretext of weapons of mass destruction. Those 7 countries were Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. That was the quote. Of course, it took more than 5 years, but almost all of them have been taken out through war or regime change operation. Only one left is Iran. Lebanon is also an issue because of Hezbollah, but big one is Iran. If Iran goes, then Lebanon goes as well, because Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. So Iran has been the target of US and Israel for many decades. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces political struggles at home. The Israeli retaliation in Gaza for October 7 attacks is also becoming increasingly unpopular in Israel and has tanked Israel's reputation across the world. Everyone is saying this is genocide because of the mass civilian casualties, and Israel's reputation has been shattered completely. There are many people in Israel who are calling for an end to the war and bring hostages back home. IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, has been exhausted. In a statement quoted by the Israeli Army Radio, reservists from Cyber Directorate accused Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of prolonging the war for his political survival. The report said that 150 Golani Brigade members are among those who signed an open letter. Last week, almost 1,000 Air Force personnel published a letter calling for the return of all captives and an end to the war. Former and active duty members of the military in various units, from Armor Corps to the Navy and Medical Corps, joined the call in several other open letters supporting this sentiment. PM Netanyahu has been fighting Shin Bet, Israeli intelligence agency. The Israeli coalition government has fired Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara and Shin Bet chief Ronan Bar. His party, the Likud party, has accused the Shin Bet of being a private militia of the deep state. Yeah, it is a little weird for Netanyahu to be like this, to position himself as this anti-deep state guy, even though he has been in power for what, about 25-30 years on and off. So it's a little weird for him to position himself as like an anti-deep state. Like, how many years in power do you have to be before you become a part of the deep state? Right? Anyway, he's facing huge protests over his fighting of judiciary. This was before October 7th, and I think those protests resumed recently. A distraction and a foreign enemy is extremely appealing to Israeli government right now. If they take out their biggest geopolitical rival in the region, it will cement Netanyahu's legacy as the tough national security guy, something he had before 7th of October 2023. He has already called for Libya-style agreement with Iran. Libya dismantled its nuclear program and faced regime change operation anyway. So, a Libya-style agreement implies regime change of Iran, whether it has a nuclear program or not, pushing the Iranian government towards developing a nuclear weapon just for its security, like North Korea. Iran will also provide NATO and US an entry in Central Asia, which will give US access to that region's natural resources that are worth trillions of dollars, and that region will allow US to completely encircle both Russia and China, which will then ensure US dominance over the world. Something US had in 1991 but lost in subsequent decades. So in 1991, US had that dominance not because of geography, but because how weak everyone else was. Now US has become weaker and other countries have grown stronger, and so now for US to have a permanent dominance over the entire world, it must get an entry into Central Asia. All the Stan states except for Pakistan and Afghanistan. All the Stan states that were part of Soviet Union. If US gets there militarily, like something like NATO or something like an agreement they have with Japan or South Korea, if they get that kind of a deal with Central Asian countries, then US will be the dominant power for centuries potentially. And there will be no rival to challenge US. So the incentives for US and Israel to go to war with Iran are really strong. Also, if there is a war in the Middle East, Iranians have promised to destroy oil facilities of Arab nations and also destroy Israel. If all oil facilities are destroyed, then the only country where China can import its oil from is Russia. Only major country. Here's the thing. China is a net energy importer. It imports more than 60 or more than 80% of its oil and natural gas from the Middle Eastern countries, the Arab countries, the West Asian part, which means Iran and Arab countries, West Asia. So that's where they import their energy from. That energy energy travels from those countries to Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, that region, and then it reaches China after crossing Philippines. The Chinese had a solution for this called the Belt and Road Initiative, where they would just bypass this Southeast Asia region, the Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, that region, and it would just import energy from Pakistan. I think that was the plan. You can correct me if I'm wrong. It was called CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Pakistan has direct access to West Asia because the southern part of Pakistan meets Indian Ocean, and it's on the western side of Pakistan is Iran and Afghanistan. So the southwestern region of Pakistan borders Iran. So they wanted to bypass this route, but if the entire region blows up, then China cannot get its oil. Then it will have to depend completely on Russia. But also its energy import will collapse. Even if it gets a lot of oil and natural gas from Russia, its energy import will still collapse. So there is another motivation for US to go to war in that region, just so they can starve China of energy. Also, most of China's exports to Europe go through that region, that West Asia region, through Suez Canal, in the Red Sea. That this is near Saudi Arabia, Israel, Egypt, and Yemen. This is that part. Chinese have a military base, official military base in Djibouti. This is near Yemen. So there's that. They can really hurt China's trade by throwing the West Asia region into chaos. America can do this. So there's that motivation for America to go to war with Iran. China's export to US, I think they go through the Pacific. They don't go through the Suez Canal. I think that's, if I remember correctly, I think that's true. But what about Iran? Iran is nothing like other countries on the American hit list. Iran has a significant military industrial complex. Not as big as US or Russia, but it has a significant military industrial complex. It has supplied drones to Russia to fight NATO proxy war in Ukraine. It has missile capacity to hit Israel. It also has hypersonic missiles. It can develop nuclear weapons if it wants to, but doesn't because of Ayatollah's fatwa in 2000s. Iranian nuclear enrichment has hit like 80% of, it has to be over 90 or 95% for them to get a bomb, and they are at what, around 80% capacity, 70 or 80%. So they can develop a nuclear bomb if they want to, but they are not going to because of Ayatollah's fatwa in the 2000s. It's also a civilizational state like Israel, Russia, China, and India. US, on the other hand, it's significantly weaker today compared to years before due to industrialization, offshoring to China, deindustrialization, and offshoring to China, dollar inflation, and all the supplies it has sent to Ukraine to fight Russia. All those supplies haven't been replenished yet. So, yes, US can win a war against Iran and overthrow the Iranian government, but it will be much more significant challenge because Iran is much more powerful than the other countries America fought in the Middle East, and America is significantly weaker today compared to early 2000s or 2010s or 1990s. So what will happen? Can Donald Trump resist that temptation? Can Donald Trump resist powers that be that want to go to war with Iran? We'll see. We'll see.
On 12th of April, this is an update. On 12th of April, US and Iran said they held positive and constructive talks in Oman and agreed to reconvene next week in a dialogue meant to address Iran's nuclear program. Arakchi, this is I think the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Arakchi, said the talks, first between Iran and the Trump administration, including his 2017 to 2021 first term, took place in a productive, calm, and positive atmosphere. These talks happened between the Iranian Foreign Minister and Trump's Middle East envoy, Stephen Witkoff, or Special Envoy. I think he also went to Putin, to Russia to talk with Putin. Saturday's exchanges were indirected and mediated by Oman, as Iran had wanted, rather than face to face, as Trump had demanded. Each delegation had its separate room and exchanged messages via Oman's foreign minister. After the end of more than 2.5 hours of indirect talk, the heads of Iranian and American delegations spoke for a few minutes in presence of Omani foreign minister as they left the talks. So talks are happening between America and Iran. I don't think the Americans and the Iranians want to go to war. I think it's the Israelis who want to drag America into a war with Iran. Israelis and their supporters in America. And I think if this deal goes through, it will be an updated version of the JCPOA deal, the Iran nuclear deal, as it was publicly or popularly known, which was signed by or done by President Obama. This will be an updated version of that. President Trump had issues with this deal, so he ditched it during his first term, and now they probably will have a better deal. I, no one wants a nuclear Middle East, and the Israelis want only the Israelis to have nuclear weapons in the Middle East. No one wants nuclear Middle East. If Iran gets nuclear weapons, then Saudis will have to do it, UAE will have to do it, and maybe Qatar will get it, Turkey will get it. It will be a huge mess. So no one wants nuclear weapons in Middle East. If they don't get if the other countries don't get nuclear weapons of their own, they will at least demand protection, nuclear protection from US. That's what will happen, and they will get a civilian nuclear program. So just one step away from nuclear weapons. That's what a civilian nuclear program basically means. So let's see what happens. Let's hope Middle East doesn't blow up again. See, like seriously, no one wants that. Let's hope that happens. Let's hope there is a deal, and let's hope there's a deal soon. Let's see.
Anyways, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys very soon.